welcomed everybody here tonight. It's lovely to see so many people here. I'm not going to take Uncle Ray, or I should say Dr. Ray's thunder away, but how we can be better stewards for the environment is a fantastic question. We know of scientific proof that show Aboriginal people have lived in Australia for over 80,000 years. And over 80,000 years, there would have been floods and droughts and bushfires. Yet how did they survive? Well, I'd like to put to you that they didn't fluke it. It didn't happen by luck or chance. They knew how to actually manage the environment they lived in. They knew what to do. They knew how to harvest grain. They knew how to store water. And so for all of our elders who have done this for thousands of years, we would like to acknowledge and pay respect to them. So as a welcome to country, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we stand, the Gadigal people, which is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation, which is bordered by the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean River to the west, and the Georges River to the south. And I'd like to pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and any other Aboriginal people here today, and honour all the elders who have managed to care for this land for a very, very long time. Have a good evening.
Good evening, and welcome to our inaugural Big Questions, where this evening we'll be asking the question, how can we be better stewards of our environment? I cannot overstate the importance of this conversation series. Positive change comes through dialogue, even more so when dialogue happens across lines of difference. I don't think I need to go back through events in history to point out where that's been the case, nor do I need to point to other times in history when a lack of dialogue or an inability to engage in dialogue has led to division, violence, war, and terror. Indeed, my very own upbringing in Northern Ireland certainly modelled the latter. Dialogue matters, yet we're rapidly losing the ability to do it. We may still debate, but the difference between debating and dialoguing is that debaters are out to win. Those in dialogue are out to learn and bring solutions. So tonight, we're not here to debate, we're here to dialogue, to learn together as a community, and then hopefully to effect action and change. To do so, that relies on every single one of us being open-minded. You will all have come with particular views on the question under discussion, and I don't want you to ignore those views. However, I do wish to ask you to listen deeply to other views that are not your own and to ask questions with a willingness to hear the answer, not simply to prove your point. St Andrews is a learning community. You might remember that I said 4 things to our students from the beginning of my time as head. You matter, your life matters, your choices matter, and what we do together matters. Well, what we do together this evening really does matter, and tonight we're starting a conversation, the beginning of many conversations that have the potential to change us as a community, and ultimately to change our world. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our host for this evening, Miss Lily Meek. I'll invite her up in a moment. I first met Lily in 2017 when I was here, when she was school captain. She is a Koori woman with family ties to the central tablelands of New South Wales through her granddad, Barry Wade Papworth. Growing up, her family navigated multiple moves until returning to Sydney in 2015, where Lily started at St Andrews in Year 9. Notable highlights, as she would say, of her time at SACS include her 2017 school captaincy, where she was an absolute delight, I can testify to that, acting as the Wicked Witch in the Wizard of Oz musical, all of Mrs. Jones's theatre plays, and her deep love of English. Lily graduated in 2017, but stays close by. In 2021, she graduated as class valedictorian with a Bachelor of Creative Industries in Film and Television from JMC Academy, throughout which she worked across various screen partnerships in New South Wales. Shortly after, she began working with SBS as part of the SBS On Demand team for a summer internship, and after 2 years of working with NITV as a production coordinator, Lily has started 2023 as a producer on the travel programme Going Places with Ernie Dingo for NITV and SBS, spending the year travelling the country to tell stories of great characters and community. She has found time in that very busy schedule to come this evening to host the first of our conversations, and when I will attribute this genius idea to the one and only Lynn Jarvis, and when she told me that she had come up with this idea, I really genuinely did think it was a genius idea. So without further ado, please let us show our appreciation for the marvellous Lily Meek.
Oh, that was a little bit lovely. Thank you. Well, thanks everyone for having me here tonight. This is going to be a little bit of fun, and I think we're all going to learn a bit. Just to reiterate, I would also like to pay my acknowledgements to the Gadigal people for having us here, elders past and present. I hope we foster some curiosity and learn a little bit tonight. My name's Lily Meek. I work at NITV now. I'm a Koori woman with ties to Coolah through my granddad, Barry Wade Papworth, and our connections to the Hannah and Roy families. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk about mob tonight, climate change, learn a little bit about volcanoes, and I think it's going to be a really great night. So without further ado, I'd like to interview our guests and introduce them to you. It is with such great pleasure that I introduce you to a truly exceptional member of our Saxon Gawara community, Pastor Ray Minikin. Pastor Ray, Uncle Ray, has dedicated his life to working with the stolen generations of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of Australia in ways that speak of deep personal integrity and an inspirational faith. He is a descendant of the Cubby Cubby and Garang Garang nations of southeast Queensland, and also the people of Ambryn Island and Vanuatu. Throughout his life, Pastor Ray has been a prominent voice in Indigenous issues, sharing his insights at a local, national, and international forums. These have included the 1995 first hearing of the UN Draft Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the 2001 Global Forum on Ethics and Economics, and in 2021 as an Indigenous representative to the UN Climate Change Conference. Just a few bougie titles. He has been offered roles to work in the Australian government, but has chosen to stay working in community. He has dealt with complex intergenerational trauma and has started, directed, and mentored numerous organisations working with and representing First Nations people, including serving as an executive member of the Indigenous Peoples Organisation Australia, IPO, a national coalition comprising of 300 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peak organisations, community groups and individuals. Ray is a driving force behind the movement to recognise the Indigenous contribution to the Australian Armed Forces, and was a founder of the Coloured Digger Project and march that is so well attended on Anzac Day presently. He has a BA in Theology from Murdoch University in Western Australia, where he helped establish the Aboriginal Education Unit and assisted in the founding of a graduate degree in Aboriginal Studies. He also has an honorary doctorate of divinity from the North American Institute of Theological Studies in recognition of his outstanding national and international achievements. With his wife, Arnie Sharon, he leads Scarred Tree Indigenous Ministries with St. John's Anglican Church, Glebe. Significantly to us, he is a co-founder of Gawara and serves as a valued member on the school council for both Gawara and St. Andrew's Cathedral School. Could you give him a warm round of applause, please? We both made it up here without falling over, Uncle. We're doing good. Joining Pastor Ray this evening is Dr. Andrew McGonigal, who has been described as a volcanologist, inventor, teacher, physicist, and engineer, just to name a few. His educational journey earned him a first-class honours degree in theoretical physics from the University of St Andrews, Scotland, followed by a doctorate in laser physics from the University of Oxford, Jesus College. He is highly respected in his field and has been published in over 100 peer-reviewed academic journals. His passion for volcanology was nurtured both by the geography of his childhood and the sheer environmental impact of the venting behemoths. He's particularly interested in utilising remote sensing technologies to monitor volcanic activity, and he has in fact developed several innovative techniques for this purpose, which are now widely used by volcanologists worldwide. In recognition of his groundbreaking work, he received the prestigious Rolex Award for Enterprise in 2008. Dr. McGonigal's contributions extend beyond his research. He is deeply committed to sharing his knowledge with the broader community and understands the significance of environmental care and protection. He has advised government agencies, NGOs, and private companies on volcanic hazard assessment and risk mitigation. As a passionate communicator, he has appeared on various media platforms to discuss his research and its societal implications, including National Geographic and the recent Planet Visionary series. Before moving to Australia, Dr. McGonigal held the position of Associate Professor in Earth Sciences at the University of Sheffield in the UK, and he is now Scientist in Residence at St Andrew's Cathedral School. Dr. McGonigal has 3 children at St Andrew's Cathedral School and is of course married to our wonderful head of school, Dr. Jolie McGonigal. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome to the stage as well. Well, thanks guys for joining me just for a little bit of light conversation on some climate change tonight. It's going to be a good one. Uncle, I'm going to kick off a first question with you if we get straight into it, if that's okay.
Give it a go.
Uncle, you have a long history advocating for First Nations people. Was there a particular moment that ignited your passion?
I guess when I was born. We start there. Because you're brought up under the Aboriginal Protection Act of Queensland, which also included the Aboriginal Protection Act with the problem of, what's that poppy stuff? Opium Act. Isn't that amazing? Didn't even know what opium was. Still don't. But we must have been growing it or something. So you grew up under that act, which really put us into communities and reserves as well as missions. And so you're brought up and you know that you're different. You can't sort of mix with the broader community. You can only mix with your own mob. And so, yeah, you grow up with that and you start questioning those kind of things right from the get-go.
Kicked it off, part of the identity. In saying that, that then meant that you were at the forefront of quite a few movements here in Australia. You were a part of the civil rights movement, lands right movement, fight for reconciliation, and now climate change. Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like to be a part of these movements and your first-hand experience?
At first it was a bit scary. You're putting yourself out there into the front and trying to make a difference. And sometimes you just got to stand up and be counted. But then also you're driven by the passion of it all too. You see all these issues in your community and you don't see the changes that you want to see. And so you've got to get out into the community there or out into the streets to actually make those protests. And for Indigenous peoples, there's the 2 major ways in which we've made advancements in this country over the last 200 or so years has been through protestation and through litigation. They're the only 2 things that have given us some kind of a leverage to progress our challenges and our issues. And so it's just a normal, natural part of who you are and what you grow up in when you're facing this kind of oppression and the kind of challenges that we faced from so many different governments.
It's pretty deadly what you've been leading, and I hope we do you a bit proud by carrying some things on. redirecting to Andrew, comparatively, I can imagine that growing up in Scotland would have been a little bit different. Can you tell me a bit about how your interest in science sparked?
All right, well, thank you very much. Yes, growing up in Scotland was very different. I think it's a bit warmer in northern Queensland. I remember first visiting this country in 1993 as a backpacker with one of my university friends, and we came over actually almost 30 years ago to the day. And I remember walking around Sydney. It was June the 16th. I remember the date, 1993. And we were walking around in shorts and t-shirt. And we were saying to one another, this country's great. The weather's unbelievable. And it was about a week later, I mean, like, you know, I'd studied physics, but not always on the ball with everything. It was about a week later, we realized it's the middle of winter. So, yes, it's a lot colder here. Also, just to reiterate, thank you for coming along. It's a Wednesday night. You've all got jobs and that thing called school tomorrow morning, and you're here. And that says a lot. Colleagues, students, parents, community members. It shows a huge amount of goodwill to be here. So thank you from all of us for turning up. We appreciate it. And we need you, you know, as we go through this whole series. So I think that says a tremendous amount. You're here. Thank you very much. So apart from the weather, yes, I mean, there's the weather in Scotland and there's the food as well. But if you can survive both of those two, then you're absolutely ready for anything. I was very fortunate. I grew up in Edinburgh, and that, as has been alluded to already, that gave me something wonderful, which was access to the outdoors. And some of you will have been to Edinburgh, and you'll know there's a big hill in the middle of Edinburgh called Arthur's Seat, which, as it happens, is an extinct volcano. And I'd spend every Saturday morning with my buddies in the cross-country running club running around this thing, as well as pursuing various other madcap climbing and hiking adventures in the Scottish Highlands. So I grew up with this just interest in the outdoors and reverence for nature and the outdoors, which I was very fortunate to have had. But also, for those of you who've been to Edinburgh, you'll realize it was just the absolute center of the Enlightenment. Now, I don't know how many historians and philosophers we've got here, but something I'm very proud about is during the 18th century, there were 7 universities in well, let's just call it the UK for right now. And okay, so Oxford and Cambridge, the other 5 were in Scotland, all right, which is extraordinary, isn't it? You know, this, you know, madcap nation of freezing, you know, malnourished people who don't have any vitamins and don't know what salad looks like. And yet within this, all these inventors and, you know, artists and great literary figures were just coming out of the ground during this incredible period. And if you walk around Edinburgh and you notice the architecture and all these beautiful buildings, which are a bit like, what's it called, where Macquarie, is it Macquarie, that street that goes between Queen Victoria and the Botanics? That street. Anyway, you know the one I mean. There's lots of them in Edinburgh, all built by clever people. And so the ideas are just springing out of the ground. And so I felt I was very, you know, I felt I could absorb that. So I had sort of one eye on science and another one with a passion for nature. But it's a lot warmer in northern Queensland.
Well, you were the recipient of the prestigious Rolex Award for Enterprise. We've actually got a little video that we'd like to play.
About 10% of Earth's population live within the firing range of active or potentially active volcanoes. My work's all about a marriage between volcanology and technology. I try and find new technological ways of understanding the ancient threat that is volcanism. I think my motivation in terms of this twin passion was, on the one hand, I grew up in Edinburgh, and so I grew up running around Arthur's Seat, an extinct volcano. The other motivation was my grandfather was a great tinkerer and an inventor, and I used to love hanging around in his garage watching him making things, and I think some of that rubbed off. We both share this common philosophy that with a little bit of ingenuity, you can look around you and find the solutions to important scientific problems. The original project for the Rolex Awards was based on using drone technology to fly gas sensors into the gases being released from volcanoes and use those measurements as a means of understanding what's going on underground. The award really helped us push forward the technology that I'd been working on previously, to the extent that now this is being used by a number of volcanologists across the planet. We're now able to make camera technology you might, for example, find inside smartphones that can see gas released from volcanoes at very low price points, whereas previously the build cost would have been 10 or even 100 times that figure. And that's highly significant because you've got these really lethal volcanoes dotted all across poorer parts of the world. One of our strongest relationships right now is with Felipe Aguilera, who works in northern Chile. Felipe has been using our tech for the last couple of years, and we're in the process of collaborating with him concerning automating our smartphone sensor-based technology. These sensors are potentially very sensitive to ultraviolet light, so these devices can be used to see the gases coming out of the top of volcanoes. We can process these images to provide information on the gas emission rate. And you might, for example, expect that to change before an eruption, helping with predictive efforts. We can proliferate this tech internationally in ways that just wasn't possible previously, which then in turn can be used in terms of saving human lives. The engineering that we aspire to in terms of developing our systems has to be exacting, because anything that can go wrong in a volcanic environment will go wrong. And there are no electronic shops just down the road where you can go and buy spare parts. Science is a fundamentally social activity. Ideas don't generate in vacuums, they generate in the carbon-based brains of human beings, and then they get passed on to other human beings who build on them. We're trying to develop units which will stand the test of time.
Now, there's definitely layers to this, but first and foremost, yes, round of applause. Did you win a Rolex, yes or no?
What should I say, Ray? I did.
Stunning, stunning stuff.
We know where all of you live, so.
Can you tell me a little bit about what it's like working on a volcano, and did this impress Dr. McGonagall on your first date?
Yeah, the problem is she will. And I'll let her do that. So regarding, well, I'll tell you a story. So I actually, when we first met, I was actually a lab physicist, so, you know, she didn't fall for the volcano thing. And later on, I started working on volcanoes. Anyway, first trip to a volcano, I was working with someone called Oppenheimer at Cambridge University, who's actually been in a really good Netflix film called Into the Inferno, which you may have seen, and which has got some great footage of a lava lake on Ambrim Island, which is where one of Ray's grandfathers hails from, so that's a nice little link there. Anyway, so on the first trip to the volcano, this was Masaya volcano in Nicaragua in 2001. I'm with Oppenheimer. We're driving up to the summit crater, and I said to him what seemed like a logical question: "This isn't going to erupt, is it?" And he said, "Absolutely not. This hasn't done a thing in, this is one of the world's leading volcanologists. It hasn't done a thing in 40 years. So I thought, okay, that's great. But then sure enough, 2 days later, it erupts. Now, it wasn't a huge eruption, and we missed this by a couple of hours. Anyway, we went back later on that day, and I saw something that I'll never forget, and perhaps it helps put in context my sense of awe regarding the world in which we live. So we drove up to the crater. There was actually a car park next to the summit crater. And before we got there, I could smell this smell of brimstone, which was from all the molten rock, which had melted the asphalt on the road, and everything was on fire. So this, just really unreal smell greeted us as we headed towards the top. And then we got there, and we looked around, and what you could see was a ring of fire surrounding the crater because the lava bombs had ignited all of the grass. And then we looked up at the sky, and there was just, cloudless, far from any street lights, beautiful sky. And then I just looked in and I saw the void of the crater that had created all of this. And you got to imagine this in the pitch black. So working on a volcano contains many experiences like that, which remind us of our how small we are in this magnificent world.
Just another day at the office, really. Is it true that this work that you've been doing here has now led to working with NASA?
Yes, so we've done a bit of work with NASA as well. So some of the tech that was in that film is based on adapting the kind of sensors that are in all of your smartphones to make them ultraviolet sensitive, and I won't go into the details, which enables us to see volcanic gases. Now, the benefit of this is it's relatively light, it's relatively cheap, and so anyway, NASA found out about this. They reached out to me. They said, we think we could use this on one of some of our tech that we're developing for the moon. As a lot of you will know, the Artemis program's happening right now with a view to sending astronauts back to the moon. And there's various ancillary technologies and sensing units attached to that. So we've been working with them. We've prototyped something with them. Whether it will fly or not, I don't know. We'll see. But it's been a privilege to be involved in that.
Yeah, how awesome. The award was also about making the world a better place, and I'm hoping your next answer to this question is yes. Is that important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, well, thank you. I won't disappoint you, Lily. Absolutely. So I was always a bit of an odd academic in that I was very, very interested in discovery, but I was also very interested as well in just, developing technology that can help people. And obviously there are many other academics that have that passion as well. So that's something that's always really motivated me. And also because I'm from Scotland, I've always had this thing, we can do it cheaper than those other guys can do it, yeah? I have pathological hatred of spending money. I'm not sure if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but anyway, it's genetic, I think. I don't think my children have inherited that gene, but anyway. It's not transmitted in marriage, I can confirm that. So you can't catch it. It's not contagious. And of course, then that means these technologies might become useful in poorer parts of the world.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, Uncle, I would say that most of your life has been devoted to making the world a better place. Nice little link there. And we've spoken on what you've done locally and around the different parts of this country, but you also have a significant voice internationally. Last year, you received the prestigious Hubert Walter Award for Reconciliation from the Archbishop of Canterbury. Can you tell me a little bit about what that moment meant to you?
Well, to go back a little bit further, the problem of the word reconciliation in this country for Indigenous peoples has been the fact that we know what the word means. And so when it was introduced as a political concept back in the 1980s, early 1990s, suddenly they wanted to have reconciliation with us. And we were scratching our heads and saying, well, hang on a sec. We've never had a good relationship in the first place. And if reconciliation means that we're going to have a good relationships, what does that mean to go back to? And are we going back under the Acts? Are we going back to that kind of violence, the massacres and all of those other kinds of things that happen to our people? What does it mean? And so we've really had a huge, big difficulty with that. And we still do to this day. And but yet, at another level, because I'm a follower of the teachings of Jesus, reconciliation is at the heart of what Jesus accomplished on the cross. And I have to then reassess my understanding of a reconciliation, what it means for, not just only for myself, but for my people and for the whole world. And so I made that very conscious decision myself that reconciliation is one of the most important issues that's facing all of humanity today, the whole human race. And we live in a world that's just filled with conflict and tensions and all kinds of things, wars and rumours of wars and all that. And we just don't seem to be able to work out how we come back together again as a community or as a family in that kind of fellowship as with one another. So I determined that I'd do that. And so the Archbishop of Canterbury's got a very good reconciliatory program called Difference. It's on his website. And he wanted to know whether we as Aboriginal people wanted to be a participant in that particular program of studies that are very much community-based. And for me, looking for any kind of programs that would help us to come to grips with the depth of our understandings of reconciliation was very worthwhile. And when I looked at his program, I said, oh yeah, this might work. But I said to the Archbishop, or to his team at that time, and to the Archbishop himself, I said, Indigenous peoples globally, as well as here in my country, we don't like the word reconciliation. It just does not seem to gel with us in terms of the histories, both of my country here, whether you talk about Canada or the United States or any other colonised people, we don't like the word reconciliation. But what I didn't know about the Archbishop at that time was he had a program and he didn't call it reconciliation, he called it difference. And that was the big difference for me, because he was saying, how do we come together through our differences, all of our differences, rather than look at the conflicts and the tensions? What about focusing on our differences and trying to reconcile our differences together? And that was the ways in which we got together, and I helped to produce something for him from an Indigenous perspective. Because for me, reconciliation, the reasons why it's so incredibly important for all of humanity is that it's not just only reconciliation with each other, at the family level or at the community level, at the individual level, at the national or international level. We also have to reconcile our differences with his creation, with our environment, because we wrecked it so much. We don't have a very good relationship with it. How do we then build that relationship? So reconciliation is not just interpersonal relationship, it's also this a relationship with our creation. And I think we've done enough damage to it. You know, the earth we can't go to a second-hand shop and buy a new something, or, you know, there is no new earth. This is it. But we're wrecking it so rapidly that we need to take a grip of what we're doing. And I think the word reconciliation with our environment becomes a much more significant challenge for us as human beings, regardless of who we are and where we live. And the third part of that reconciliation too is reconciliation with the creator of it all, the maker who made this creation. We don't have a very good relationship with him too. So how do we then figure all of these things out as human beings who have this incredible responsibility? And for me, in looking at it through and working it out through the scriptures, I come to realise that as a follower of Jesus, I have both the ministry of reconciliation, I have the message of reconciliation, and I have the responsibility of reconciliation according to the scriptures there in the book of Corinthians. And because I'm an ambassador now of Jesus, and so that gives me a much more deeper relationship with the language, but also a deeper commitment to my responsibilities with all of humanity, with all of our creation, and also with our Creator. And that's what I spoke to the Archbishop about. And I met him over there in COP26 in Glasgow, and we had some more conversations there about it. And that's what I'm working on.
Yeah, hang on, don't get too far ahead of yourselves or you're going to ruin all my questions.
Okay.
In going into that, we'd like to share a clip now produced by the Difference program where you share your thoughts on caring for the environment as part of the Christian identity.
Curiosity is a very important part of faith, because faith is connected to hope, which is connected to some kind of an understanding of not only your surroundings or of the past, but also of the future. And so how can you not be curious if you're a follower of the Jesus way? Because that's what he taught his disciples, to be curious about the situations that they're in, and the ways in which faith operates is through curiosity. And it digs deep into your, not just your curiosity, but more importantly, into your creativity as well. And then you become much more creative as how you can make those things happen. And broadens your understanding and your scope of how incredibly powerful you are as an individual and as a human being, how God created you to be. And Moses is a very good example of a very curious individual. To think that he could be used by his Creator to be able to deliver a whole nation of people, beyond imagination, beyond imagination. If you look at Matthew's Gospel 25, there's a whole series that's about 6 things that Jesus points to where the power structures are dealing with human life in such a very, very powerfully destructive way. When he says to his disciples, I was hungry and you fed me. Now, you've got to ask the question, why were they hungry in the first place? If democracy is there to serve all of the community, then why aren't they being fed? Or I was thirsty and you gave me to drink. I mean, we just got to look at our climate today and realize that water is one of the essentials of how we look after each other. And yet here in New South Wales, we have a huge big challenge of trying to make our rivers run. Or our seas are rising. And these two issues, hunger and thirsty, are 2 of the most important global issues that we face in climate change. Because how are we going to feed everybody? And if we continue to let the powers that be, that discourse of power, continue to tell us that we're not in this kind of crisis, then we have to be like Moses. Be curious. Be present in that situation and reimagine what could be. So these 2 issues, hunger and thirst, are very, very critical for our present day situation. Whether it be our global situation or whether it be in our own community where people aren't getting fed or even getting a drink of water, that's critical. From Genesis 1, he created all of this stuff here, put man in the middle of it, and he wanted us not to have dominion over it, to own it in some commercial sense, but to steward it, to look after it, to care for it, not as an individual, but in partnership with our Creator. That's a completely different concept in terms of how you manage country and manage land and all of these kinds of things, because it's a partnership with the guy who made it, not the other way around, which we've tried to do with our market economy. We try to own it and then make sure that we can sell it on the open market and get some value out of it. It works for the market economy, but not in God's economy.
Yeah, how awesome is that? You tried to go into it before, but you went to the UN Climate Change Conference, Uncle, in Glasgow, partly because of your work with the Difference Program and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Can you tell me a little bit about what that was like and some key takeaways?
It is a huge, big challenge for all of humanity. It's very hard to get our heads around the damage that we have made to our planet. And like I said before, there's no second-hand shop around that we can get a new heaven and a new earth from. We can't go out there and find a new river. We can't, there's nothing that we can do to bring those rivers back together if we continue down this pathway. And so, I mean, you know, you've got little communities like Walgett who can't even have clean drinking water. They've got to purchase it. And I've been into many of those communities where they won't drink the water because it's polluted, and so they have to drink Coke and all this other stuff to be able to quench their thirsts. I mean, this is happening now in our day and in our age, and it's our responsibility to do something about that and to make sure that our governments and those who are in power and those responsible, we need to hold them accountable to their responsibilities to those people who are a part of our community here in this country here. They're our citizens too, and they deserve the right to have access to good, clean drinking water, as well as to good services of food. And also, in terms of the food, the problem a lot of those communities face now, not just here, but in other parts of the world, even here in Sydney, is that we can't afford it. And it's making it much more difficult for us to actually feed the rest of the community. And we just got to do something about it. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we've got to do something about it.
Was this a big point of yours to make at the Glasgow conference?
It's a big point. I mean, there's a number of other issues there that we needed to look at from an Indigenous perspective. One of them is this, trying to be concise as possible, is that when the G7s and the G20s and all the other big noters come together around the globe, we've often said as Indigenous peoples is that those people who are making those decisions, either at the IMF or the World Bank or all of these other countries, there is no Indigenous voice there. We don't get an opportunity to say anything about the country which they've invaded, they've destroyed. Now we don't even have a voice to go back to them and saying, hey, hang on a sec. You've got to stop this. You've got to do something different. We have a right to say, don't mine there. Don't destroy this sacred place. Don't destroy this land over here. Don't do this because it's going to damage your own future, not just our own. Even our old people have, criticised the ways in which we've extracted uranium because we knew that that was a damaging piece of material that we knew was going to create all kinds of weapons of mass destruction. So we didn't want that. We don't want the responsibility of coming from our land, going into someone else's hands to make some kind of a weapon that could destroy others as well as to destroy ourselves. And so we don't have that authority. And I think for young people, to me, that is the most important thing that we're lacking today. And there's a big difference between power and authority. And the only way I can explain it is if you're going up Bathurst Street here and the lights are out, and in Bathurst and Pitt Street, for example, and there's a policeman standing in the middle of the street there guarding traffic. If there's a big truck coming down there and the driver doesn't like policemen, that policeman does not have any power whatsoever to stop that guy from running over him. But all that policeman's got to do is just stand in the middle of the street and put up his hand. He might not have the power, but he's got the authority. That's what we're missing in this whole debate around climate crisis. Whether you go to all the UN nations, there is no authority. And that's what I saw over there at all these COPs. The authority is missing. The voice is there, and all the power groups are there, but there's no authority.
Now, I'm going to bring that back a little later, talking about that authority and why we should have it. But for the moment, Andrew, excuse my naivety, we know that you have an impressive number of academic qualifications in science, but what the heck do physics and volcanology have in common, and how do they contribute to your understanding of environmental issues?
I was going to ask Ray how he enjoyed Glasgow, What was the weather like when you were there?
I love Glasgow.
Good. Did you eat any food while you were there?
I did eat haggis.
And what did you think?
I can't remember now, but I enjoyed it. I can't remember what it tastes like, but I did enjoy it, yeah.
All right. So you didn't have to go to hospital afterwards?
No.
Okay, that's good. But I understand you discovered you actually have some Scottish blood as well.
I do have on my grandmother's side, her father was, I sometimes don't like saying his name because of all the conflicts and clan decisions over there, but he was a Campbell, Colin Campbell. And I did discover that there were Campbells there, and I felt a lot more at peace with my presence in there. And I still haven't found out where he was taken from, what happened to him. I'm still searching.
It's all right. We forgive you.
Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to have welcomed you to my country. What was the question? Volcanology and physics. Right. Okay. So so I suppose if we think about, so what's the connection between physics and volcanology? Look, I guess we develop tech from physics that we try and use in volcanology to try and, solve problems there and understand what's going on. In terms of this notion of climate change, as a physicist, here's how I would think about it. I would think physicists always reduce everything down. So I would think about the Earth being a ball in orbit, a certain distance from sun, where life is eminently possible because it's basically just the right temperature so water can exist in a liquid state, which is kind of important. So you don't freeze unless you're in Glasgow, or you don't boil unless you're in northern Queensland. So that's how I'd think about it in that sense. Now that would make me think very carefully about why climate change is so important, because we're in exactly the right place. We call this the Goldilocks zone sometimes in popular science. If you go a little bit closer to the sun, you end up with Venus, which is a toasty 470 degrees centigrade, so that's not really ideal, with a runaway greenhouse effect and a gas that's so dense that the landers that went down in the 70s just jettisoned their parachutes with about 50 kilometers above the surface because they didn't need the parachutes anymore. Or your other option is you go to Mars. Now, of course, there is discussion about terraforming Mars, and in principle, perhaps that could be done, but obviously that would be very costly and a very, very complex exercise. It wouldn't really be an ideal thing to do, given it's very cold there, there's no real atmosphere, and the temperature fluctuation is absolutely massive. So from the point of view of a physicist, I would say we're onto quite a good thing here, and it would be a really good idea not to stuff it up. There may be other planets in other solar systems that would do the trick, but it might take us a while to get the technology to get there. From the point of view of volcanology, I would say I'm very grateful to have witnessed nature's might firsthand and to report back and say that this lovely concrete environment that we live in right now is completely atypical of what the world's really like out there in the wild. And therefore, again, we must, and I think everybody, by virtue of being here tonight, is probably on message with this, but we need to just remember our place in the world and act accordingly.
Very well said. In conjunction to you just talking about our comfortability in our little concrete world here, just a light question for you, but could you tell me in black and white a few of the facts surrounding climate change? What are we dealing with here?
Okay, so this is the potted history of climate change in 2 minutes. I'm not a climatologist, by the way, so if there's any in the audience, don't kill me. And this isn't supposed to sound like, very depressing. But okay, so here we go. Here's a volcano, releases lots of gas to the atmosphere, which can affect climate change, and people often talk about that. Volcanoes actually cool the climate in various different ways. Pinatubo was the last big eruption in 1991. When it went off, it actually temporarily offset the global warming which had happened due to greenhouse gas emissions for a couple of years thereafter. There's a little bit of heating associated with carbon dioxide from volcanoes, but it's very minor. And a slightly shocking thing is that actually volcanoes only really a few percent of the carbon dioxide which comes about as a consequence of human, or we'd say anthropogenic-based activities. Okay? Is it going to happen? So there we go, right? So here we go, the magic finger. This is very famous. Some of you may have seen this before. This is called the Keeling Curve. These are data taken from the top of Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii, which is the site for the Mauna Loa Observatory. It's one of the best atmospheric observatories on the planet. It's situated there because it's very high up in pristine air in the middle of the Pacific. Therefore, you get a good read on Earth's background atmospheric composition in the absence of pollution. So what we can see there is that CO2 levels have consistently risen, the up and downs due to various seasonal effects. Long and the short of it is that carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have gone up about 50% since the Industrial Revolution. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere absorbs outgoing heat radiation from the Earth, so it acts as a blanket, therefore it keeps us warmer than we would be otherwise. If we had no greenhouse effect at all, the Earth would be about 15 degrees cooler, which wouldn't really be great. So we need some greenhouse effect, but with an enhanced greenhouse effect, Earth heats up. Now, obviously, Earth has got hotter and colder at various points during geological history, but Earth has, as a consequence of anthropogenic CO2 release, Earth has heated up by about 1.1 degrees. Now, there's all sorts of other things going on in the climate system with volcanic eruptions and sunspots and blah, 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 but that's the basic gist of it, about 1.1 degrees up. And then, obviously, there are question marks in terms of what happens in the future in respect of different scenarios for CO2 release, which were discussed at depth in the conference that Ray went to when he had haggis to eat in Glasgow.
I feel like that deserves a little bit of a round of applause for a 2-minute explanation. Now, Uncle, I'm going to get to you in 2 seconds, but just whilst we're on the topic, Andrew, your data suggests the Industrial Revolution was a critical turning point for the environment. Many people view this time as a time when humans sought to control the environment rather than work in harmony with it. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so look, I mean, I'm quite conflicted, actually, genuinely in answering this question, because I've just given you a great diatribe on how wonderful the Enlightenment was in Scotland and how clever we all were for all of our inventions and how magnificent that all was. But of course, one of the great inventions which came about was the internal combustion engine, which some of you may know about by virtue of cars and all sorts of other things, which has led, among other things, to the release of all of this carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So look, I suppose my view on it would be that that period of history, what came from it, was a grasp of our agency. And I think that's a very powerful thing, regardless of what your view is on what it means to be a human, and maybe that's a topic for another big question. But regardless of what our view is about what it means to be human, there was a very powerful sense of grasping agency, particularly in terms of discovery, exploration, industry, and invention. And that's had far-reaching impacts on the world, and a lot of that came from Scotland and other parts of the UK. So I think it would be wrong to demonize it, and that's certainly not what I would like to do, because I'm personally quite proud of, in a sense, being attached to that, or generatively sort of descended from that in one way or another. But yes, we could causally point back to where we are right now, to some of those technological developments. Again, that wouldn't be to be judgmental to assume that those people had purposed that this happened. But yeah, there would be a causality in that sense. Was that enough?
I think that was enough. What it means to be human. Just the light topics tonight, everybody. Now, Uncle, dabbling a little bit of 80,000 years worth of history here, going back. Can you explain connection to country to me?
Actually, it's very simple, because we're all indigenous from somewhere. And like Andrew, when he goes back to Scotland, it's not that he knows the country, but the country knows him. The mountain knows who he is and his ancestry. The rivers, the oceans, the birds, the animals, the whole of that environment knows who he is. That's connection to country. And when you go back to your countries, whichever countries you come from, you'll find the same thing, that the rivers remember you. The mountains remember who you are. They remember your ancestors. They remember where you come from. Your very, very birthplace is already embedded in the memory of your country. Your whole history is there. That's what I mean by connection to country. And so when I say I'm from the Kabi Kabi people, there is a certain mountain there that I identify with. That's where my grandmother comes from. And another way of saying it in a more generic way from an Indigenous perspective is in our birthing rites, when a mother first feels the pangs of childbirth, for them, that mother, it's the spirit of that place, the creator spirit, who has also participated in the birth of that child. So when the child is born, its placenta then is buried in that soil. Well, that's the only piece of land rights that Aboriginal person has to that country. That's his connection. That's where my mother laid me down, as the old people would say, right there on that spot. That's my country. That's my connection to country. But through that connection, it's just not only through that little spot there, but the whole of that estate that is a part of his family, his kinship, his connections, his totems. All of those things are a part of that connection point. That's connection to country. And every one of us have some kind of connection to our own country. Like I say, you go back to your birthplace or to your ancestors' birthplace, and the mountains, the rivers, the land will always welcome you home.
Now, Uncle, country remembers. They remembers you, remembers me, remembers everyone when they go back to their birthplace here. It also remembers custodianship and 80,000 years of old ways. How would you describe our current situation and the current state of country?
Well, we've got some issues there and challenges there. And we've gone through a period there when we still don't have what I would call a very good environmental policies in place to actually protect country. And it's a little bit hypocritical, I think, for me to see this, because when I look at England and the environmental protection places that they have over the Great Lakes and all these other places, you can't mine there. You go up into the Scottish Highlands there and you start mining there, and you'd have a war on your hands. But you can go into the outback here and find some dirt, and you can blow it up, dig whatever you want, because there's the protection of country in terms of our environmental laws are not strong. They're so weak. They actually are there not to protect the land, but there to protect those who are raping the land or taking resources out of our land, and we don't have any protection against that. And so, yeah, we've got some challenges there, serious challenges, as to how we, as a people, as a nation, take up the responsibility of saying, hey, hang on, enough is enough, using our authority to say enough is enough. We've got to protect our little speck of dirt here, otherwise we're going to lose the lot. And I know up in the Torres Straits, for example, the sea rises, it's risen 4 inches already. And some of their ancestors' coffins are now flying out to sea because of the sea rises. Kiribati, Kiribati, even Tonga. I was asking some people from Tonga, how's your water over there? They're going to be running out of water, drinking water, in a few years' time because the water is not drinkable. And so one of the challenges, I think, for us is just not only the refugees who come in on boatloads, but the refugee crises that's going to come out of the climate crisis. Where are we going to house them? How are we going to feed them? How are we going to look after them? How are we going to put them into places where they can thrive again? And so these are some of the challenges that are emerging, or they've already emerged in some places anyways. And, we just got to look at Pakistan and some of these other countries who've had huge big floods and huge big earthquakes and all kinds of other things that have destroyed their livelihood. It will take them generations to regenerate their lands again, to get back some kind of a resemblance of how to be reconnected to country and how to then restore their livelihoods again.
Uncle, we've just talked about connection to country, we've talked about old ways, and you brought up a little bit about community before, but what do you think the current implications and impacts on mob, on Aboriginal and Torres Strait community are from climate change?
Well, there's so many. And we're discovering more of those kind of challenges already in terms of the high sickness rates, but also now the climate change crisis is also affecting mental health. And that's just not only for Indigenous peoples, I think that's for all of us. We have not yet got enough data or analysis on how much it's affecting our mental health and the mental health of our children and how much it's affecting them. And perhaps we're not focusing on it as much as we should. So the problem we're going to face shortly, and it has happened quite literally overnight, is that if you're running out of food stocks in Walgett, for example, you're going to end up in Redfern looking for a house. So we're already facing this type of crisis now, and we don't have the housing stock, we don't have the jobs for them, we don't have the educational facilities. We've got, we're stuffing it up in so many different ways if we don't look to these kind of issues and say how we're going to navigate through those kind of challenges and put people back onto their land and help them to generate some kind of a way of looking after country again.
Is that a solution, do you think? Us sending mob back to take care of country?
We have to get back to country. We have to look after it, yeah. We've got to sort of look at the ways in which our laws operate too. Because like I said before, it comes through protestation and through litigation and then through legislation. If we can get the right laws in place, then we can possibly see some kind of results. I mean, we heard some signals from this present government here, through our member here, in closing down a mine or stopping a mine or two. But in some of those places, we can see the results of the climate crisis when the waste goes into the oceans and into the rivers and creates all kinds of problems. Because I know I was brought up on the land. I know all of those food products. Now we're seeing the destruction of those food. I wouldn't eat fish out of this harbour, for example. I wouldn't do that. That would be funny. I think they're poisonous. And so we're poisoning our water holes. We're poisoning our rivers. And so, yeah, we've got a huge, big challenge there ahead of us. I don't know how we're going to resolve it.
I don't know either.
Yeah, but it's up to this younger generation here. And you younger generation, from me personally, I just want to apologise to you because I don't think I'm working hard enough to make sure that I'm protecting your future.
Andrew, do you think the wider community, what do you reckon the effects of climate change are going to have on them?
Okay, so I suppose I'll be reasonably brief because I don't want everyone to go home tonight and think big questions was a bit heavy. But maybe what I could just say is, look, one of the big things that's come to me as I've thought about this recently, as you know, we've literally moved halfway around the world to be sitting next to Ray having this conversation this evening, is the way that everything's just so related to everything else. And I can't think of another, I can't well, I suppose COVID was probably an example, but a really truly pan-global problem, or maybe putting it another way, something we need to find a solution to in partnerships. So no, I think everyone's affected by this in some way or another. Following on from what I said earlier regarding the global heating, that causes melting of ice caps, which causes sea level to rise. Clearly, poorer nations or nations with particular geographies will be more affected by that. Pacific Island peoples, for nations exactly. I mean, there's some Pacific Island nation states where, the entire land mass is within a few meters of sea level. So they're clearly very, very affected by that, and that's affecting borehole, drinking water, et cetera, et cetera. But look, we're seeing these things everywhere. Anyone who lives right next to the water, I mean, the sea level rises. It's not, it doesn't just rise in one country and not in another. Venice, for example, has had, famous issues with this in recent years. But there's teleconnections, increasing teleconnections everywhere in terms of absolutely everything. Think of all the supply chain issues which, have affected, almost every business over the last couple of years. Throw climate change into the mix. An economy goes bang here, a crop's disrupted there. Those kind of things will have repercussions in terms of the global economy. And also, there will be refugees as some areas become just impossible to live in. As water becomes scarcer, that may have implications in terms of conflict as well. So not wishing to be too gloomy, but at the local scale, there will be very granular and potentially quite severe impacts in different parts of the world.
I'm going to circle back to solutions to, I guess, what we've just discussed, like I said, so we don't all go home have a really lovely gloomy dinner. But I just wanted to come back, I guess, and approach this from a faith-based angle. I'm going to start from a spirituality standpoint first, Uncle. With what you've just described in terms of connection to country, and obviously within community there are traditional methods of taking care of country and making sure we're, looking after land. What can everyone learn from that connection to country?
Hopefully the responsibilities we have, but more than that, because of that connection, the authority we have to say we want to protect our little piece of turf for our future generations. See, with Indigenous peoples, when you look at that we could survive in this country for so long, is you've got to look at one other aspect of Indigenous knowledge, and that is the ways in which we made decisions. And we lived in what you'd call a 7-generational principles of decision making. So here we are in this particular generation. We would gather the wisdom that's been passed on by not just our fathers or our grandfathers, but our great-grandfathers, who they had learned from their ancestors. And so that ancestral knowledge is passed on. I receive it. And then I've got to make sense of this particular knowledge in order to pass the same kind of information on to not just my children or my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and those yet to be born. So you're living in this 7-generational principle all the time to make sure that you look after everything that's within your powers to look after, including your environment, including your people. That's it. That's as simple as it is. The challenge we have in present day thing is that we only live by 4-year cycles. And so when we get the new government in, they change everything, and then we've got to change with that. And so we don't have the capacity to actually sit down and say, well, let's have a long-term view of this, and what do we need to do in order to put in place the kinds of decisions that we need to make, not just for ourselves or to get elected again or for the next generation, but for 4 generations down the track. That would be, for me, an opportunity to say, yes, we're starting to do something serious about it. But we're not there yet. We can't make those decisions because we're worrying about who's going to get in power next. And this is just not only an issue here in Australia, it's a global issue. because we're going through all this, what they call democracy, and the regurgitation of that every 4 years.
And I guess in response to that then, to get ahead of the curve, what do you think governments do need to do?
Look at it, there's two institutions that are so ingrained in our community that we often neglect the one that is really there, that has the capacity to change things. And that's the religious institutions. They have a huge opportunity. In a sense, they do have their God-given authority to act. But you don't hear the voice of these religious institutions in this particular debate. And if you look at all of the COPs, all the times that the nations have met together through the United Nations, well, we're up to 27 now. You go back to the one in 1900. Actually, it started way behind that. The first one was in Rio. But if you look at the participants in there, there are two voices that were absent. One was the church, and the other one was in the Indigenous voice. And they're the ones who have, to me anyways, both have this incredible authority to actually guide the nations and all of us into a better future if we would use this thing here. I call it Benangari in my language, just to make it bigger so that we could listen to each other and then start to plan for a future. But I must say that it's up to these young people here now to take that mantle on themselves and see what they can do on the knowledge that they have and the opportunities that they can do, because the authority lies with them, not with me anymore.
No pressure, guys.
No pressure. No, you just can do it. I've got great faith in you.
Now, Andrew, Uncle's just discussed the role that being a custodian and then the church have in affecting climate change. It's often been suggested that being a scientist and a Christian are mutually exclusive. Can you speak to how your faith intersects with your work as a scientist and how may complement or challenge each other?
Yes, thank you. So again, that's probably down for the future in terms of, something to maybe unpack in a little more detail at a later date. So look, I'll just share a few thoughts, and there's all sorts of things that could be said. And as I say these things, I recognize that there'll be, everyone here is going to have a different view on this, and so therefore I say the following with great respect. The way I sort of often think about it is that in both there's a sense of order and there's a sense of the other, okay? Now, I haven't read any theology books or anything on this. This is just my sense of it. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that God is constant, reliable, and unchanging, okay? Now, that sounds a lot like the laws of physics, fortunately, okay? Or mathematics. And one of the most, I think, extraordinary things, and the more I think about it, the more wonderful and perhaps perplexing it becomes, is that mathematics works wherever you look. It works. Now, this might not have crossed your mind sitting in grade 9 maths class, but might I just impress this thought on you for your consideration at some point during your schooling? The fact that maths works is actually quite remarkable. So, look, so therefore, if everything we see around us has a blueprint of Creator God, all of that would add up. So I would see those things in very much in tandem. So, for example, I could bore you all night with physics, but let's just take that old chestnut of Einstein's general theory of relativity, which we were just talking about earlier. It doesn't matter how you test it across the universe, it works. It's extraordinary. It's an incredible, it's just a beautiful, elegant explanation for all that is. So to me, that would fit with my notion of what God, its inventor, is like. So you've got that, but then there's also the other. So if you think, physics has got it all sewn up and we understand everything and it's time to move on to something else a bit more interesting, you'd be entirely wrong. And in fact, the deeper we kind of go into the rabbit hole, a bit like Alice in Wonderland, the odder it gets. Some of it's completely intuitive, but a lot of it you can only really explain and describe using mathematics. Yet again, our words, our vocabulary, our intuition falter completely. So, I could talk about this all night. So, for example, quantum mechanics, we think about light. So we think of light, being a wave, but actually light also behaves like a particle. And what does that mean? It means we could launch a probe into space and we could put up a great sail and it could sail away from the sun by being based on the collisions of the photons, which are particles coming from the sun that would be pushing it along. Now, how does that work? Well, it does in physics. So physics is entirely beyond our intuition and imagination in so many different ways. Or special relativity, which tells us that the faster we go, time slows down, length contracts, and we get heavier. Like, how does all of that work? Yet physics tells us all these things. So physics has got what I categorize as the other, the things which are completely, fantastical and beyond our imagination, which also fits with the notion of God. And so my take on this is, if God was just the order, he'd be a bit boring. If he was just the other, then the universe would be a wild and terrifying place. But I see both of them in God, the Christian God, in Jesus, and also in science. Is that enough?
I'm going to be thinking about that in the shower tomorrow morning. I'll be like, I totally understand what he means now. I guess my follow-up question to that as well is, how do you think... I just heard you say more. You're like, seriously? Do you think, and how do you think your faith gives you responsibility for the environment?
Okay, hugely. And so I'll just follow I'll just really riff off what my esteemed colleague has said in his very important video to us all. He's not there anymore, but he was there. Now he's here. Through the magic of science. You see, physics. It's increased the other. My other orderly friend, okay? So I think there's a few things in here. If you've read the Bible and you're interested in the Bible, Jesus talks about being a neighbor, and he uses this very subversive example of who's the neighbor, and he refers to a Samaritan being the good neighbor. The most reviled imaginable person who could have been produced in this story. So I think there's the notion of the neighbor, and within this whole idea of climate change, we're all one another's neighbors, and I think we've always been one another's neighbors. It's just this makes it very obvious. So Ray is my neighbor. The carbon dioxide that I released in my house in Edinburgh in 1970 whatever has made its way around the atmosphere and is contributing to the climate change, which is affecting Ray's mob over here in Australia on the other side of the planet. So I think that provides an absolutely profound imperative to think globally with respect to these issues. This whole idea of partnership, I often think we're supposed to be gardeners. There was a story about that, wasn't there, in the beginning? Something about a garden, yeah? That seems to me that's how it's supposed to work, yeah? Garden, looking after it, pruning it, not destroying it and taking the whole thing down or thinking, how do I segregate this so all the apples are over here and all the oranges are over here? And not that I'm not being critical of commerce at all. That's not the purpose of the analogy. But a careful custodianship in terms of gardener and guardianship in that respects. And then finally, I liked your thing about Moses. Again, there's another story about, when God summons Moses and then presents to him his, ultimatum really, to lead the people out of Egypt. There's this farcical moment when God says to Moses, what's that in your hand? Now, presumably the Almighty knows what Moses had in his hand. And what did he have in his hand? He had a rod, and then this rod becomes the instrument whereby he parts seas, and you'll perhaps be familiar with the story from the Bible or maybe from Charlton Heston film. Anyway, so there we go. But the whole idea here is God using what we've got, whatever that might be. And so that's always been a very powerful thing for me, whatever is at our disposal, and maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in terms of some of the gadgets that we've worked with There isn't any more, is there? Is that enough?
That was good. Just another question. Well, now that we've established that climate change is real and we all have an immense responsibility to catch up and get ahead of it, I thought we'd end on, a little bit of a solution-based, happy pep in our step. Pastor Ray, what role do you think traditional Indigenous knowledge, not just in Australia, but from all Indigenous peoples internationally, could play in protecting the environment?
Getting back to three things. Getting back to the theological understandings, one of the motivations for me has always been this text in John's Gospel, chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world, the cosmos. And the challenge, I think, is theological, because Western theology has reduced that whole cosmos down to you, the individual. God loves you. And we've swallowed that particular doctrine and made it into us as individuals rather than we as a collective. But God still loves his world. He's not going to see us destroy the whole thing. He's going to do something about it, I know that. The second thing is that there is hope. There is one little country on the planet that has shined a beacon on the whole world on how you resolve the climate crisis. And it's a little country called Costa Rica. You know what they did back in 70 years ago, in 1949? I was born in 1949 when this particular little country decided that they would get rid of all of their military equipment. They wouldn't spend any money on military. They'd spend it on the environment. Can you imagine Australia doing that in 2023 or 24? Just think about it. $500 billion spent on our environment. That's the challenge we're facing. And Costa Rica has already done that. You go to that country, the only people that invade that little country called Costa Rica are tourists, because they want to see how the environment that they have created is looking after them. Yes, they might be on the poverty scales and all that kind of stuff, but they made the choice. They took the authority and said, we'll do this, and they've done it. So we can do it too. For God so loved the world. If we're his children, how much do we love our world and our environment and our people? The other country too is Switzerland. It's done a lot of this kind of stuff as well and looked after its people and its land in ways in which it's given their future generations an opportunity to flourish. We've got to get to that stage sometime in this particular country. And the other thing, I think, as a challenge for us all, is to go back and read the Paris Agreement, because that's the agreement that Australia signed, and we need to hold them accountable to that. Because if we go over 1.5 in terms of the heating of the planet, then we're in dire straits. But that's our responsibility, and that's the authority that we have to say to our governments, are we on the right track here?
If everyone could just start working on that tonight, that would be fantastic. Andrew, what contribution do you think science is going to make to solving these problems?
Oh, look, it's absolutely massive, and I think I'm hopeful. Like I think we've got to look where we are in the eye. I think it's naive not to. But I think, there's so many bright people in the world, enterprising people, entrepreneurial people, who are itching to get stuck into a good problem and solve it. And look, a lot of you fall into that category. I think this community is absolutely outstanding in terms of the caliber and the conscience of a lot of the individuals within it. And I've already had the pleasure of talking to a few of you about some of these sorts of ideas. I think it's massive. I mean, for example, UK is now 27% of our electricity is from wind power, The electric wind generator, I actually didn't know this, I Googled it earlier in researching for this conversation, was invented by a Scot. Just pointing that out. Yeah, he patented it. He was actually, thankfully he wasn't a Campbell. Do you know any Campbells? Not that he's saying, I can smell a Campbell from a mile off. I have my limits. Anyway, so it's Campbell, James Blythe from Campbelltown. No, James Blythe, I'm lost now. He invented this, 1887, to power his holiday home. So he must have been very genteel. So yeah, absolutely. I think science will have a huge part to play in this, and is already playing a huge part.
For all of us going home and having our existential crisis tonight, this is open to both of you. Anything individuals could do? Individual work towards contributing against climate change.
Oh, I think it's simple. Let's learn to love one another. Simple as that. And love our environment as much as we love each other. Let's get back to that. Basic things of love, loving one another, loving our neighbour.
Okay, well, I think we'll probably have a bit of a discussion about this afterwards. It's been the night of big answers, maybe more than big questions or big talking. I think it's important just to recognize the agency that we've got. So for example, some of the tech that we've developed, we actually developed that off the back of failing to get a number of grants awarded. So whereby the plan was to go and buy some instruments off the shelf at a much greater price point to build this tech up than to use it in volcano research. And I remember sitting down with the team in the pub, and our heads were all in our hands, and we were thinking, what are we going to do? Then some bright spark had the idea, let's just make one ourselves. So anyway, then we sat down with this oh my goodness, look, the slide magic happens. So we sat down, and we thought, yeah, we can do it. Emboldened by my Scottish frugality and a sense of, yeah, we can do this. So we did, and we developed this technology which no one thought we were going to be able to do, and now everyone wants to buy them off us. So I suppose, what am I saying? Well, what have you got in your hand? What can you do with that? And that will mean many different things. Look, there are entrepreneurs in the audience, there are technologists in the audience. Obviously, you've got to think about how you're going to make money out of this if you're a business owner. But what's in your hand? And what strikes me about a lot of the people in the room here is there's huge talent that could be deployed and is already being deployed to develop technologies. This isn't solving the climate crisis. This is helping people live at risk from another aspect of the environment. And so I think there's a huge amount that can be done. And I was are you going to ask me the question, do you feel hopeful about the future? Have you already asked me that question?
That was my next question, but
okay.
You can segue beautifully into that.
No, I'm going to stop, because I think we need to listen from Lord Campbell.
Uncle, feeling hopeful about the future?
I am, actually.
Oh, good.
And I'm hopeful because we're in an environment where we can learn about these things and that we can do something about them, not just as individuals only, but also collectively. And I know that we have the capacity to turn it around. Just like other generations before us have done it, we can do it too. Yes, we've got all this bleak stuff in front of us, but we can change the world. And if a little country like Costa Rica can do it, I know a little country like Australia can do it too.
All yours.
Okay, thank you. Right, so riffing off that, I'm hopeful as well. I think, so I've already said a few things regarding, I think there's peculiarities surrounding this community that make it very well posed to have individuals in it that will make a big difference in terms of enterprise and in terms of conscience, which is why you're here. I think if you weren't concerned with these sorts of things, if you weren't willing to engage in the nuance of all of this, you wouldn't be here this evening. So again, reiterating my thanks for coming along. The next thing I'm going to say, which is going to riff into the video that we're going to watch in a minute, is that the technologies that we worked with to develop, anything I've developed in the last 15 years to work on a volcano has been based on cheap consumer-grade technology, which we've reappropriated, be that drones or relatively cheap electronics, which you can get inside smartphones and that kind of thing. Using things like 3D printing, programming with like Raspberry Pi computers. Maybe some of you will have played around with some of them. Now, what really strikes me, and this is why I'm very interested to be doing work in schools right now, is that this is the sort of tech that actually school-age students know how to use. 3D printing, Python programming, blah, blah, blah. So what I'm very interested in is how within the school, watch this space, can we start actually developing things in-house which could engage with some of these problems? So that's a little idea that not just me, but a number of people have had, and I feel as though we could probably do something in this space. And one of the reasons I think that is because we've got a bit of a track record in this area. Cue Lily.
Oh, that was subtle. We're going to just hold for a little while before I roll what could be a video. We're now going to take an opportunity for people and you guys to ask some questions utilising the Slido link that Lynn provided now and at the start. If you can type them into the Slido, submit them. The link is on the screen now. If you would like to ask a question specifically to either Uncle Ray or Andrew, please just put in the header who you're directing your question to, make my job a little bit easier. And then whilst we're all doing that, hintity hint hint, we have a wonderful video from our 2021 school captain, Dylan Newen, which shares his story on how he applied what he has learnt at school to develop a bushfire risk map for the Rural Fire Service. And I really hope you enjoy.
I came to Australia in year 2 from Vietnam. I spoke very little English, totally out of my depth when going to primary school. I had never taken a science class before coming to SAC, so when in the first lesson we were doing like safety and then we looked at a Bunsen burner, I was really freaking out, but I was always welcomed here and I always felt supported here, and I'm really grateful for that. One thing that's always stood out to me during my time at St Andrews is the focus on using what you're taught and applying it to solve the challenges that you see. There's always an understanding that what you learn has consequence if you're able to apply it to the real world, and I think that's something that's really valuable about the education that we get here. We really understand what it means to be a part of our community and what it means to be able to serve other people. Towards the end of 2019, I went on the St Andrews 20-day hike. Our hike was unfortunately cut short 14 days through because there was a 2,000-hectare bushfire one morning when we woke up, and we had to be evacuated back home. And that really made an impact on me because it really put me in touch with the reality of the suffering that was happening there. At the end of that journey, I had an inkling that I wanted to apply my computer science skills somehow. I did my research, I made a design brief, I made a plan for how to implement it, I went through the plan, and I got a product at the end. So my computer science teacher, Mr. Till, knew this guy he played baseball with 20 years ago who turned out to be a superintendent for the RFS. Main problem for the RFS is how to best manage its resources. One of the most essential resources in firefighting is, of course, time. If the RFS are able to be more efficient, that means they're able to save more homes, they're able to save more lives, and they're able to reduce the amount of land that is ultimately affected by these bushfires. And you'll be able to focus their attention towards things that are more crucial, that are more important. We're a fairly low-income family, and I was really, really fortunate to be able to be granted the scholarship and to be able to be supported financially throughout my entire time here. And it's really an opportunity that I'm immensely grateful for, and I hope that I've been able to give back to the school in a way that, justifies everything they've given to me. Looking to the future, what I'm interested in is applying computer systems to solve some of the global challenges we face, like poverty, inequality, and the ones that are associated with climate change as well.
All right, let's get stuck in. Our first question, authority and recognition of difference seem to be important concepts around creating real impact on climate change. How do we enliven both concepts? Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah.
All right. Authority and recognition of difference seem to be important concepts around creating real impact on climate change. How do we enliven both concepts?
Yeah, one of the challenges we face as humans is that we like to focus on single issues rather than complex issues, because the single issues are easy to deal with and we can probably find a solution to it. Whereas the complex ones we leave out of the conversations. And we're hoping that tonight we might have, broadened the conversation, just not only with climate crisis, but with the other issues and other challenges that we face. And I think it does come back to just the old notion of sitting around and having a good yarn with each other. And talking it through. Because we're not going to resolve this individually. We can't allow one institution to resolve it for us, because that one institution has got about another 5 or 6 who are against what their solution is. And so it's going to be up to us as humans beings to sit around and try to work it out ourselves around the campfire. That's how we would have resolved it. One of the things that helped me in my earlier days with my rage and my anger at the injustices that our people were facing was I went to one of my elders here in Sydney, and he was a great man who had trained a lot of our Aboriginal activists, communist, but a lovely man. And I used to go and talk to him, because dealing with our stolen generations always generated a whole range of incredibly deep, passionate, emotional issues for me. Sometimes I'd go home and I couldn't even talk because of the incredible rage that was in me. And as I went in there and I started to talk to Alunk, the first thing he did was he just said, sit down, nephew, I'll make you a cup of tea. That to me was, I said, I just thought to myself, if only, our politicians could learn that secret. Sit down, I'll make you a cup of tea. And let's talk it out. And I'd walk out of that house within, his house, within an hour, and I didn't have those kind of situations. He didn't give me the clear answer, but I knew I went away looking that I would have an answer. This year, for NAIDOC Week, our theme is for our elders. Let's not put our elders into old people's homes. Let's try to drag out the knowledge that they have. If we can do that, then I think we'd probably be a little bit more better off, because their wisdom is based upon the wisdom of their ancestors as well. And I think we've got to get back to those. Just conversations are like that. I know Indigenous peoples globally have always resolved the issues that they've faced and the challenges by sitting around and having a cup of tea.
And some Arnott's Bickies. Very important. For Andrew, what is the next big technological step that would have the biggest net positive impact on addressing climate change?
All right, well, that's a small question. I'm just trying to guess who asked that question. A few suspects. Okay, well, look, a lot of I guess there'd be a few possible technologies that might help in that regard. A lot of the technology is relatively mature. I mean, it doesn't mean it can't be further matured, but a lot of R&D's gone into solar panel technology and into wind turbine technology, for example. So a lot of that is just finding a mechanism and a financial route towards a wider implementation of those technologies. In the UK, we've been quite fortunate in that we've got a lot of shallow shelf where we can situate turbines, so you don't have to have these terrible discussions concerning it's in my, you know, I don't want a wind turbine in my back garden, even although I love the idea of green energy. One intriguing thought, and this is controversial, but I'm just going to say it anyway, is fusion, nuclear fusion. So if you talk to a physicist and you ask the question, what form of energy extraction is going to get best bang for buck, nuclear fusion would be up there on the list. It's been demonstrated to some extent, but there's questions in terms of how viable we can make that, and obviously that relies on use of nuclear material as well. But I would say that that would be one of the things that would really jump out to me.
Awesome. Pastor Ray.
Well, one of the challenges of that response is that it requires raw materials. And where is that raw material going to come from, and how do we, look after the land even after you've extracted that raw material? And then when the raw material is processed, it comes out at the other end, where are we going to put it? And the logical place is, I'll put it in the backyard of our Aboriginal community, which is usually the response from governments. But they're the questions that also be a part of that particular ways in which we resolve this. It's just not only where does the raw material come, even with all the computer stuff that we saw here, that's coming out of raw materials. Where is it coming from? And if we run out of those raw materials, what else are we going to use? And like I say before, there is no second-hand shop. There's no garage where we can take the earth and say, listen, fix this up. We're the garage, we're the mechanics, we're the ones who've got to fix it.
Pastor Ray, this next question is for you. Will traditional nature preservation still work in the modern climate, where we have reshaped our wilds so radically?
Traditional nature.
I think will traditional nature preservations still work in the modern climate where we have reshaped our wilds so radically?
It's a huge, big challenge. That is so difficult, and that's the reasons why we try to get over to these COP26s, because we don't have the capacity to look after country as we should have. So we know that the knowledge is there. We have the knowledge, but you can't apply it if you can't get onto your country to do it. And the other challenge with that is the ways in which land laws operate, whether it be freehold or leasehold or mining leases and all those kind of things. If I go onto those lands now, even though it might be on my country, I will be arrested, I will be put in jail, because I am now a trespasser. And so you've got to look at a whole range of complexities that actually, I'm not going to say forbid us from practicing it, but restrict us from practicing what we'd like to practice. Or the other way around it would be to make sure that in our negotiations with a mining company or some other company that's looking at those kind of management issues, is to sit down and negotiate a better way forward. But it always is a problem for us. If you're looking at mining, for example, it always means that there's going to be some kind of extraction from the land, and that disturbs the ways in which that land will operate into the future.
I guess taking that one step further in regards to the question is, do you think traditional techniques of healing country still work?
I would hope so. But like I say, even with the 7 generational principle, That's almost an impossibility in this day and age. And so, unless there is a huge, big shift in the ways in which we think about the future. So I'd love to say yes, but I'm reluctant to do that because I don't think we have the appetite for that kind of those kind of changes in our community. It's too big. The changes are too huge.
This next one's lovely. What can we do as school kids with climate change?
Me? Thanks.
Open to the floor.
Okay, well, let's see what you think about this, Ray. But I think maybe not just in terms of climate change, but overall. So again, going back to what I said before, something I'm really genuinely interested in is the fact that I've spent 15 years developing tech to solve problems on volcanoes and in various other regards right now, using really the tech which exists in the TAS department in St Andrew's Cathedral School. So, okay, so that's interesting, okay. And what strikes me is that almost for the first time ever, school-age students have access to technology and also the wherewithal in terms of being taught how to computer program and all these sorts of things, which could be used to solve problems. So what I would say is, think about what problem you're interested in. Maybe it's in climate change, maybe it's not, maybe it's in healthcare. You know, what could you invent? What could you design? Think about Dylan. What you know, he clearly he was driven by a passion. He saw a problem. He's on his hike, he can't continue. There's a clear problem. The problem's related to climate change, you know, arguably, maybe not directly, but maybe indirectly in terms of a longer term change to climate here in Australia. So he thinks, all right, what have I got in my hand? I'm quite good at computer programming. I know what, I'll get really, really, really good at computer programming and I'll develop something which can be a solution here. So I suppose what I would say to you guys, and I feel this very passionately indeed, you have agency and you actually also have ability, more than you realize. Dylan, look, Dylan is just wonderful, and I've told him that myself. So I'm not being disingenuous in saying this, but and none of you are here to follow his footsteps because you're not him and you're never going to be him. But I suspect for a lot of you, you could do something a bit like that. So think about it. You've actually got the ability to do far more. And there's people in the audience, they know who they are. And we've already had all sorts of madcap ideas about things that could be invented in schools that could solve real problems that exist in the outside world on the basis of the tech that's already there with the 3D printers and you know, the computer programming. So I don't know who answered that question, but I hope anonymously that I've answered it.
And let me just add too, to the young people, that it's not the problem of money. We've got more money on the planet that we can poke a stick at. But what we do need is good ideas, because good ideas are the currency of the future. And if you've got a good idea, that's what's going to drive the new economies, the new communities, the new ways in which we see the world. And good ideas cost nothing because they're already inside you. And we want to hear them, we want to see them, and we want you to get out there and make them work for us.
I'd also add that you're off to a really good start being at nights like this. I think it's really cool that you've got two titans of amazing resources on stage. Just keep learning and keep plugging away. What can City Slickers do for the environment, excluding protest? Open to both of you.
I think it's first and foremost is to really understand the challenges that we face, not just as an individual, but as a community, and work out the ways in which you want to protest to make sure that there is change. And there's many ways to protest. You can get out there in the streets and do that, but you can also write letters, or you can also generate for the politicians very good ideas. There's a whole range of ways in which you can do that without upsetting, jumping off the harbour bridge or walking around with the placards. I know this because one of the challenges that I faced with the stolen generations was, we'd march in the streets asking the government to apologise and all that. And all the marching and all the protests and all the speeches and all the activists and all the activities, what was happening was the stolen generation was still sitting in the gutter in their pain. And so what I had to do was say, well, I've got to work with that. And we've got to work with that. And so, yes, you can do all the protesting, but the issue will still be there. And so the protesting can be advantageous, or it can be a lot of hot air. And that's one of the things you've got to decide what to do with and how you protest, so that you get a positive outcome for yourselves and for your community, and if there's some victims around, even for the victims themselves.
Thank you. Oh, look, again, I think the fact that everyone's here just says a lot, and I think it says a lot for, the community. I was asked this question at a conference years ago, and we went down like 9 people, and everyone gave an idea that wasn't an idea. They said something, but there was nothing sort of actionable. So I said, well, I know what. Everyone just changed their energy supplier to a green energy supplier. And the audience was shocked, like, what? So maybe that's something to think about. Now, I don't know how this works in Australia, but it just suddenly occurred to me. Now, not that I'm suggesting that, it would be catastrophic to immediately, explode certain industries overnight. I'm not suggesting that for a second. We've seen that in the north of England with when Thatcher closed down all the coal mines and the terrible problems that can create. It has to be much more staged than that. But that would send a very clear signal in terms of what people actually want, in terms of their market behavior.
Next one is, France banned any short-haul flights today. Do you think governments are going to need to be this drastic to motivate the change necessary? Sort of slips into what we just discussed.
I don't know.
At least he's honest.
Do you want me to say something? Yeah, okay, so look, I think I'm going to respond to the bottom point and partly to the second from the bottom point. I think sometimes these conversations come down to either a rant at politicians or, blaming politicians or whatever. And look, in defense of politicians, and, we've come from the UK, so you might have, been watching the news in terms of some of the antics we've had going on there. But in defense of politics, the problem with the political cycle, as mentioned here, is that it's like being CEO of an organization which you kind of know probably isn't going to be around in 3 years' time. And so that changes everything in terms of your event horizon for decisions. And even if you're the most roguish of prime ministers, and I can think of an example in the UK who just springs to mind, you're probably going to be okay, right? You're probably still going to be able to earn a crust and everything's going to be okay. So there's an implicit problem within the political system regarding addressing this problem, which clearly lasts longer than 3 years. And in fact, the changes we see in a time frame of 3 years will be intangible, whereas the changes we see in a time frame of 10, 20, 30 will be absolutely enormous. So there is an issue in that. And so I think one of the things that is important is that we mustn't vilify politicians for this. I mean, can they do more? Of course they can do an awful lot more. And is it an excuse? It's not an excuse, but there's a problem with the system. And the last point pertains to that. We're facing an unprecedented problem that concerns absolutely everyone on the planet, which requires a multilateral, a universal response, which is very difficult to do because who blinks first and loses out in the short term on the basis of that. So there's a sort of stalemate on all sorts of different levels, which is what you meant over haggis in Glasgow. So I think to some extent, waiting on government isn't necessarily the best approach here. Clearly, that said, if you're a business owner, you've got to think about, well, how am I going to make this thing work financially? And that obviously can exist within the constraints of the law and what grants are available, et cetera, et cetera. But waiting for government or pinning it all on government would I don't think, get us there.
Oh, I feel like the next one we've almost touched upon. Oh, nice. Well, there we go. We'll read those out anyway. 2 comments. 7-generation decision-making principle is such an enlightenment compared to a 4-year political cycle decision-making. I think we can all agree on that. One's a little bit more long-term. And then not a question, just a big thank you to Pastor Ray and Dr. McGonigal for generously giving their time to help us all together as a community of learners. I think we can all get around that with a bit of a round of applause. And I guess on that note, yeah, go for it.
Okay, just one quick thing. I wanted to say, and I'm not sure how this fits into the future of BQs, but it strikes me that there's people in the audience who know far more about how to answer some of the questions that were put up than either of us two do, and we would acknowledge that. And it would be wonderful if we could find a way of maybe tapping some of your brains on this. It would have almost, yeah, so just in acknowledgement of that, and maybe a foretaste for the sequel.
That's okay. And that's a big thank you to you guys for coming out tonight. We really, really appreciate it. We hope you learned something. And yeah, thank you so much to Pastor Ray, Dr. McGonigal for coming out and teaching us something tonight.
Obviously, in my role, the question about what can we do as students is a really pertinent one. And let me just sum up with a reminder for students of some of the things that were said and some of the things that you could do. So the first thing is the last point that was made. You can think about models of government that allow for long-term thinking. Now, those of you in the younger years may be sitting there thinking, well, when am I going to do that? You might take global politics. You might do it in your extended essay. It might be part of your personal project. There's so many routes in this school for you to actually think about that question. And you might think to yourself, well, I'm never going to change that. Well, actually, you could. You genuinely could. And we need people thinking about models of government that allow for long-term thinking. Because we don't have long-term thinking, that's the problem. Qualify in law, get the environmental laws changed. Learn about the countries that have done things and lobby government in this country. Connect to a place near you that you love and then look after it. Might be just a small part of a river, it might be a park. Make sure that there's not litter, make sure that it's not closed down in relation to building projects. Use what's in your hand. And then the last thing, which is what Dylan said, take what you're taught and use it to solve the challenges that you see. The single thing that is synonymous across Dylan and these two individuals that you've heard from this evening is that they are deeply aware. They listen deeply and therefore see the problems, and once they see the problems, then go on and fix them. So hopefully you'll have taken away something very powerful from this evening. I know I certainly have, and we are really, really grateful, not just to Andrew and Ray, but also to Lily for facilitating such a wonderful conversation. Thank you very much for coming. It was wonderful to have you all here, and we'll look forward to the next in the series.